The rope around Clara's wrists bit so deep into her skin that she could feel her heartbeat pulsing against it. Every twitch of her hand sent a hot sting through the raw flesh, but she didn't dare try to ease the pain. If she did, her uncle's sharp voice would cut into her like a whip, or worse, his hand would. Dust swirled in the late afternoon light, thick and dry, catching the sun in a way that made everything shimmer and waver, as if the world itself wanted to look away from what was happening. Clara stood in the open space between two men, her uncle on one side, a Comanche warrior on the other. The silence between them felt as tight as the rope binding her. Her uncle's hand was calloused, cracked from years of ranch work, and stained with the deep brown of tobacco. He gripped the lead ropes of 3 chestnut horses, lean, muscled, animals whose ears twitched restlessly at the quiet tension in the air. Their nostrils flared, breathing out hot clouds in the cooling afternoon. The smell of them, mingled with dust, sweat, and leather, filled Clara's nose until it was all she could breathe. The Comanche warrior stood tall and still, his posture unshaken by the dry wind tugging at his long black hair. He wore a beaded vest over a soft buckskin shirt, the fringe swaying just enough to hint at movement. His face was hard to read, not cold, not warm, just unreadable, as if his thoughts lived deep inside where no one could touch them. Dark eyes studied Clara, not with the greedy, measuring look she had seen from men before, but with something heavier, something she couldn't name. The air between them felt stretched thin, like a rawhide rope ready to snap. Clara's mind swirled in fragments, her mother's face years ago before she died, the little corral at home where she used to feed the goats, the day her uncle took her in and made her scrub floors until her fingers bled. A hawk cried somewhere far off, its sound slicing through the heavy stillness. Clara swallowed hard. Her throat dried out. Her uncle spat into the dirt, the sharp pat of it loud in the quiet. "She's yours," he said flatly, tugging on the lead ropes to bring the horses forward. The warrior didn't move immediately. He glanced at the animals, his eyes sweeping over their flanks, then back to Clara. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then, without a word, he stepped forward and reached for the rope around her wrists. Clara flinched, bracing herself for the sting of rough hands, but the touch that came was careful, slow, deliberate. His fingers were warm against her chilled skin, and he worked the knot loose with the quiet focus of someone diffusing a trap. When the rope fell away, blood rushed back into her hands in a tingling burn. She rubbed at her wrists instinctively, expecting him to jerk her forward, to drag her toward whatever fate awaited. Instead, he stepped back just enough to pull a folded blanket from the back of his horse. It was heavy, hand-woven, the colors rich and alive, deep crimson, warm gold, sky blue. He draped it over her shoulders, tucking it lightly at the front so the wind wouldn't catch it. Clara's heart thudded hard against her ribs. She didn't understand. She had seen men claim women before, in trade or in violence. They didn't offer blankets. They didn't loosen ropes. Her uncle grunted, tossing the lead ropes to the warrior. "Keep her fed. Don't bring her back." Then he turned, boots scuffing in the dust, and walked away without looking at her again. For a moment, Clara just stood there, her fingers clutching the edges of the blanket. The warmth of it seeped into her chilled arms, but it didn't erase the knot in her stomach. The warrior still said nothing. He looked once toward her uncle's fading figure, then back to her. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and deep, carrying an accent she'd never heard before. "You ride." He nodded toward his horse, a tall bay with a glossy coat and a watchful eye. Clara hesitated, glancing from the animal to him. Her heart pounded with questions she didn't dare voice. Why had her uncle done this? What did the warrior want? And why, in all the cold fear that wrapped around her, was there a small spark of something she hadn't felt in years, the strange, bewildering weight of being seen without another? Word, he took her arm, not with force, but with a steady guiding pressure, and led her to the horse. The wind carried the scent of rain far off in the hills, and the sun dipped lower, casting the world in gold and shadow. Whatever was coming next, Clara knew one thing with unshakable clarity. Her life as she had known it was over. The warrior's horse towered over Clara, its sleek bay coat catching the last shreds of sunlight. The animal shifted its weight, snorting softly, the sound deep and steady, like it was breathing in the tension around them. Clara had never ridden anything taller than her uncle's old mule, and this horse looked like it could run across the world without stopping. The warrior didn't ask if she could ride. He just placed his hand at her waist, warm, strong, deliberate, and lifted her up in one smooth motion. She landed in the saddle with a sharp inhale, clutching the edges of the blanket as the leather creaked beneath her. He swung up behind her, and for the first time, Clara felt the sheer size of him. His chest was bare against the cool air, his skin warm where it brushed her shoulder through the thin fabric of her dress. She could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing, slow and calm, as though nothing about this day had unsettled him. The horse moved forward with a light nudge from his heel, its hoofs thudding softly against the packed earth. Clara's uncle was already a dark shape in the distance, shrinking with each step. She didn't look back again at the land stretched out before them in endless waves of gold and shadow. Sagebrush dotted the flats, their scent sharp in the cooling wind. A line of red cliffs cut across the horizon, their faces glowing faintly in the setting sun. Somewhere far beyond her sight, she could hear the faint rush of water, a river, maybe, winding unseen through the land. "You are not afraid?" His voice rumbled behind her, low enough that it almost blended with the sound of the horse. Clara hesitated. "Should I be?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. "Fear comes from not knowing what is." "Ahead," he said at last, "you will learn." The horse picked up its pace, moving from a walk to a steady lope. Clara's stomach tightened with each rise and fall of the saddle, but she kept her hands on the blanket rather than the reins. She didn't know if he meant for her to touch them, and she wasn't about to test his patience. They rode in silence for a long while. The land began to shift. The flat plains gave way to rolling hills, and the air grew cooler. The first stars blinked into the sky, pale at first, then brightening as the sun slipped away entirely. Clara tried to keep her mind blank, but questions swirled in anyway. Who was this man? Why had he taken her without a word of protest? And what would he do with her once they reached wherever they were going? She remembered the way his hands had loosened her bindings, the way he'd placed the blanket over her shoulders, but kindness could be a trick. She'd learned that much from her Uncle Dot after what felt like hours. The warrior slowed the horse and guided it toward a small grove of cottonwoods. A faint flicker of firelight glowed between the trunks, and the smell of wood smoke reached her. A second man sat by the fire, older, with hair streaked in gray, wearing a long deerskin coat. He looked up as they approached, his gaze passing over Clara, then resting on the warrior. A quiet exchange in Comanche followed, the words sharp and fluid, impossible for her to understand. The older man's eyes flicked back to her once, unreadable. Warrior dismounted first, his bare feet silent on the grass, then offered a hand to her. She slid down, her own feet meeting the earth with a jolt that traveled up her legs. The blanket still clung to her shoulders, heavy with the day's dust. He pointed toward the fire. "Sit," Clara obeyed, lowering herself onto a log beside the flames. The heat licked at her chilled skin, and for the first time since leaving, she let herself take in the smell of roasting meat from a pot over the fire. Her stomach tightened. She hadn't eaten since dawn. The warrior knelt near the fire, adding another log. Sparks jumped upward, disappearing into the night. Then With deliberate care, he handed her a wooden bowl filled with thick, steaming stew. Clara stared at it for a moment. It wasn't what she expected from a man who had just taken her in trade. She looked up at him, trying to read his face in the firelight. "Eat," he said simply. The word carried no threat, just an order, calm, steady, certain. She took a bite, the taste rich with herbs and game. Warmth spread through her, filling the hollow ache in her belly. And for the first time that day, her hands stopped shaking. Clara ate in silence, the wooden bowl warming her hands as the fire popped and hissed. The rich, savory broth slid down her throat, soothing the raw dryness left from a day of dust and fear. Every now and then the warrior glanced her way. Not in hunger, not in cruelty, but as if he were making sure she remembered she wasn't invisible. The older man by the fire watched her, too, though his gaze was quieter. There was a weight in his eyes, the kind of weight that came from having seen too much of life. His face bore deep lines, each one like a cut made by years of wind, sun, and hard choices. When she set the bowl down, the warrior spoke in that low, steady tone. "You will rest here tonight." His words didn't leave room for argument, though they didn't carry the cold edge of a threat either. Clara wasn't sure which unsettled her more, a man who barked orders or one who spoke them. Like uncheckable truths, the warrior rose from the fire and walked toward the horses, his long black hair catching glints of firelight. The muscles in his back shifted under his skin as he moved, the beads and bone of his necklace clicking softly against each other. Clara's eyes darted away, heat rising to her cheeks before she could stop it. The older man said something in Comanche, his voice low and gravelly. The warrior replied without looking back. Clara didn't understand the words, but she caught the tone, a question, followed by a short, certain answer. The older man studied her again, his eyes narrowing slightly. He didn't speak to her, but he reached for a small leather pouch. By his side, pulling out a folded piece of soft deerskin. With deliberate movements, he walked over and handed it to her. She hesitated. "It is for your wrists," he said in accented English, her breath caught. Slowly, she accepted it, unfolding the soft leather. Inside was a small salve, smelling faintly of pine and something sweet. She glanced at him, unsure why either of these men would care about the rope burns her uncle left. "You can put it," the older man added, gesturing to her wrists. She rubbed it in, the coolness easing the sting immediately. Her throat tightened, not with tears, but with a strange, wary gratitude. The warrior returned from tending the horses, his steps silent in the grass. He carried a rolled buffalo hide and set it down near the fire. Then he pointed toward it. "You sleep there." Clara nodded, though her muscles stayed tense. She hadn't shared a camp with strangers before, much less a man who could break her in half with his bare hands if he wished. As she lay down, she pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The fire's warmth reached her face, but the air beyond it was sharp with cold. Above, the stars were scattered so thick it felt as if the whole sky had tipped and poured them out. She could hear the horses shifting in the grass, their soft breath steady in the dark. The warrior sat across from her, still shirtless in the night air, his posture tall and unmoving. His eyes stayed fixed on the fire, as if he could read something in the flames. The older man dozed, his chin dipping toward his chest. For a long time, Clara pretended to sleep. She watched the firelight play across the warrior's face, strong jaw, high cheekbones, the shadow of old scars on his arms. There was nothing careless about him. Every movement, every glance seemed chosen, measured. Eventually, the night settled into a quiet rhythm, the crackle of fire, the sigh of wind through the cottonwoods, the occasional distant howl of a coyote. Clara's mind drifted in and out, never fully at rest. Just before sleep finally pulled her under, she heard him speak, not to her, but to the fire itself, in a language she couldn't understand. His voice was low and even, like a prayer. Or a promise. She didn't know why, but the sound of it made the fear in her chest loosen just a little. The first sound Clara heard was the steady snort of horses. It was just before dawn, the sky painted in faint strokes of gray and lavender. The fire had burned low, a faint orange glow nestled under the ash. Her breath made small clouds in the crisp air. The warrior was already awake. He crouched near the horses, running his hands along their legs, checking hooves. Even in the weak morning light, his bare chest caught the pale shimmer of the rising sun. The muscles in his shoulders shifted as he moved, the beads and bone of his necklace swaying softly. Clara pushed herself up, the blanket sliding from her shoulders. The older man was gone, or maybe he was somewhere in the trees. She looked around, a small edge of panic prickling at her skin. The warrior's voice carried low across the camp. Eat. He nodded toward a small bundle on a flat rock near. The fire, strips of dried meat, a small cake of cornbread. She ate slowly, more from caution than hunger. The air felt different this morning, tighter, like the earth itself was holding its breath. The sound of hooves reached her before she saw them, a deep rolling rhythm, many horses moving as one. Her eyes darted to the warrior. He didn't look startled. He just rose to his full height and turned toward the noise. Within moments, they appeared. 5 riders cresting the low ridge, their silhouettes sharp against the pale morning sky. All were warriors, bare-chested despite the chill, their long hair streaming behind them, weapons strapped across their backs. The lead rider's face was marked with streaks of red paint, his eyes sharp and searching. Clara's pulse jumped. Were they here for her? The warriors slowed as they approached, their horses kicking up light dust. The lead rider swung down first, his gaze sweeping from Clara to the man who had taken her in trade. They spoke quickly in Comanche, their voices carrying a weight Clara couldn't untangle. She caught only one word repeated twice, her name. The lead rider's eyes settled on her again. There was no malice in them, but they studied her the way a man studies a storm cloud, as if trying to guess its strength. The warrior who had claimed her stepped closer, placing himself slightly in front of her. It was subtle, but Clara noticed. His voice when he spoke was calm but edged, like a blade wrapped in cloth. The lead rider answered with a short, sharp laugh. The others behind him chuckled under their breath. Clara didn't know the joke, but she knew it was about her. Her stomach tightened. She hated not understanding, hated being the only one in the circle of men whose words were useless. She took a half-step back, her heel brushing against the ashes of the fire. The warrior glanced over his shoulder, his eyes meeting hers for the first time that morning. "You stay," he said. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't loud. But it pinned her in place all the same. The lead rider spoke again, this time pointing toward the horizon, toward some place unseen. The warrior shook his head once. His hand rested loosely on the hilt of the knife at his hip. Not threatening, just there. For a long moment, no one moved. The horses snorted, pawing the earth. The air felt heavier with each heartbeat. Finally, the lead rider swung back into the saddle. He gave Clara one last glance, then clicked his tongue, and the group wheeled their horses around. In moments, they were riding away, their shapes shrinking into the pale distance. Clara exhaled slowly, realizing only then that her fists were clenched tight. The warrior walked back toward her, his steps measured. "They will come again," he said quietly. Her breath caught. "Why?" He didn't answer right away. He looked toward the ridge where the riders had vanished, his jaw tightening. Then he turned back to her, his eyes steady. "Because you are not just a trade." The words sank into her like stones dropped into deep water. She didn't know what they meant yet. But she knew without question, that they would change everything. They broke camp in silence. The warrior didn't hurry, but there was a sharpened focus to every movement. The way he checked the horses, the way he tied the packs, the way his gaze kept sweeping the ridges behind them. Clara tried to match his pace, but the air felt heavy this morning. Even the light seemed different, brighter but colder. She kept hearing the echo of his words from before, "You are not just a trade." When they mounted, he didn't let her ride alone. Instead, he pulled her up onto his horse, seating her in front of him. The closeness made her tense, but she noticed his arm resting just slightly along her side, not restraining her, but guarding her. The horse's gait was steady, its breathing deep and even, carrying them east toward the rising sun. They traveled for hours without speaking. The land opened up into vast plains dotted with low sagebrush and the occasional jagged rock outcrop. Far in the distance, snow still clung to the tops of blue mountains. The wind carried the scent of pine and distant rain dot. By midday, they reached a narrow canyon. Its sandstone walls rose high and close, the sunlight slicing through in golden beams. The sound of the wind faded here, replaced by the faint drip of water somewhere deep inside. The warrior stopped his horse and dismounted, motioning for her to follow. She hesitated. "Why are we here?" His dark eyes studied her for a moment, then he knelt in the dirt and began drawing. Using a sharp stick, he traced the outline of a hand, then drew a circle in the center of the palm. He looked up at her. "This is the mark they saw." Clara frowned. "Mark?" He stood, then reached for her left hand. She tried to pull back, but his grip was firm, not cruel. Slowly, he turned her palm upward. In the center, faint but clear, was a small birthmark, a perfect circle, darker than the surrounding skin. She blinked. She had always known it was there, but she'd never thought of it as anything but an oddity. "It's just a spot." The warrior's jaw tightened. "Not to them." Before she could press him, the sound of hoofbeats echoed through the canyon. His head snapped toward the entrance, every muscle in his body tensing. He moved quickly, pulling her toward a narrow cleft in the rock. They slipped inside just as shadows crossed the canyon floor dot from their hiding place. Clara could see slivers of movement, riders, at least 3 of them, their silhouettes sharp against the light. One dismounted, scanning the ground. His voice carried in the stillness, low and urgent, speaking the language she didn't understand. The warrior beside her didn't move. He didn't even seem to breathe. His hand hovered near his knife, the leather hilt worn smooth from use. The minutes stretched, each one louder than the last in her chest. Finally, the riders moved on, their hoofbeats fading into the distance. Clara let out a slow breath. "They're following us," she whispered. He gave a single nod. "They will." "Keep following." She swallowed hard. "Because of the mark?" He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "You carry the sign of a story older than this land. They believe it belongs to them." The words made her shiver, not from cold but from something deeper, the sense that her life was no longer her own. When they emerged from the cleft, the sun was lower and the wind had picked up again, scattering dust across the canyon floor. They mounted quickly, riding hard and fast out into the open plains once more. Hours later, when they finally stopped to rest near a lone cottonwood, Clara found herself watching him as he drank from a water skin. His chest rose and fell, his skin gleaming with sweat in the late light. There was something unshakable about him, the way he stood, the way he seemed to belong to the earth itself. She didn't know where he was taking her or why, but she was certain of one thing. Whatever lay ahead, she was caught in something far bigger than a trade of horses, and the mark in her palm was the key to it all. They rode hard through the night. The horses' hooves pounded over the hard-packed earth, the rhythm thudding in Clara's bones. The wind whipped strands of her hair into her eyes, but she didn't dare raise a hand to brush them away. Both hands gripped the saddle horn as the warrior's arm held her firmly in place. His chest was a solid wall of heat against her back, steady even as the land pitched and fell beneath them. Behind them, faint but growing, came the sound of pursuit. Clara turned her head, just enough to glance over her shoulder. At first, the darkness was all she saw. Then, a flash, a glint of silver in the moonlight, the shape of a rider cresting a low rise. Her throat tightened. "They're gaining," she whispered. "I know." His voice was calm, but she felt the tension in his body, the subtle shift as he leaned forward, urging the horse faster. The plain seemed endless under the sweep of the moon, a patchwork of shadow and pale light. Sagebrush blurred past, and the cold bit at her cheeks. Each breath was a sharp burn in her lungs. She didn't know how long the horses could keep this pace, but the warriors behind them rode with the relentless patience of wolves. When the first arrow whistled past her ear, she flinched hard. The warrior's arm tightened. "Down!" he barked. She ducked low, pressing herself against the horse's mane as another arrow sliced the air above her. He veered suddenly, pulling the horse toward a stand of cottonwoods near a winding creek. The water glimmered faintly in the starlight. They plunged into the shallows, the cold spray stinging her skin. Hoofbeats splashed close behind. Halfway across, the warrior swung himself down, pulling her with him. The horse, freed, bolted up the opposite bank. Clara stumbled in the knee-deep water, the current tugging at her legs, but he caught her by the arm and dragged her into the reeds. They crouched there, soaked and shivering as the riders thundered. Past, three shadows on dark horses, streaking down the far side of the creek. Clara's breath came fast. Why didn't we keep riding? They would follow the horse. He glanced toward the ridge, his eyes scanning the land. They will ride ahead to cut us off. She swallowed hard. And then? Then we find a way they cannot follow. Before she could ask what that meant, he started moving, pulling her into the tangled shadows of the trees. Branches clawed at her blanket and tangled in her hair, but she kept close. He moved like a man who had done this 100 times before, choosing each step to leave as little trace as possible. They climbed a low slope, the ground soft with pine needles. At the top, the world opened again, the land falling away into a maze of broken rocks and narrow ravines. The wind here carried the sharp scent of stone and lichen. He stopped, turning to her. Moonlight caught in his hair, making it gleam like black silk. His chest rose and fell, breath steady despite the hard ride. This is where they will lose us. Clara looked out at the tangle of cliffs and shadows. Or find us trapped. His mouth curved in the faintest ghost of a smile. Only if we move like prey. They descended into the maze. The walls rose high on either side, sometimes so close she could brush both with her hands. The path twisted, unpredictably, and more than once she thought they had come to a dead end. But each time, he found a narrow cut in the rock, barely wide enough for them to pass through. After what felt like hours, they reached a small hollow. A fallen cedar lay across one end, and the ground was soft with sand. Above, the sky was a narrow ribbon of stars. "This will do," he said. Clara sank to the ground, every muscle aching. Her mind spun with the events of the night, the arrows, the chase, the cold bite of the creek. She glanced at the warrior. He was watching the entrance, knife resting across his knee. His profile in the moonlight was sharp, almost carved, and utterly still. For the first time, she realized she wasn't just afraid of being caught. She was afraid of what would happen if she had to leave his side. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote yipped and was answered by another farther away. The night wasn't over yet. The hollow was quiet, but Clara's heart thundered loud enough to drown out the night sounds. She crouched low, the cold sand pressing into her palms, her breath coming in shallow bursts. The warrior sat beside her, his dark eyes scanning every shadow beyond the narrow mouth of their hiding place. "We can't stay here," she whispered. "They'll find us." He shook his head slowly. "They will come." The sound came first as a low rumble, then grew into the unmistakable beat of hooves. 3 riders burst through the darkness, faces painted with fury, weapons drawn. The leader's eyes locked on Clara immediately, sharp and accusing. "You carry the mark of the ancient bloodline," he spat. "That birthright belongs to us. Not a trader's daughter." Clara's mouth went dry. She looked to the warrior, who rose slowly, bare chest gleaming in the moonlight, muscles tense like coiled steel. His voice was steady but fierce. "She is under my protection now." The leader laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the night air. "We'll see how long that lasts." The other 2 riders spread wide, circling the hollow, cutting off escape routes. Clara's pulse surged. This was no longer just a trade or a chase. This was a war, for her, for the secret she carried on her skin. The warrior drew his knife, the blade catching the faint light as he stepped forward, placing himself between Clara and the riders. His eyes never left the leader's face. Leave? Now? Or face the consequences? The leader sneered and raised his hand, signaling attack. The 2 riders charged. The warrior moved like lightning. He parried the first rider's thrust with his knife, the clash ringing out sharp in the quiet night. His other hand grabbed the man's wrist, twisting hard. The rider grunted, stumbling back. The second rider swung a heavy club, but the warrior dodged, his bare feet finding grip on the sand. He countered with a fierce strike, driving the attacker back with a blow to the ribs. Clara watched, breath caught in her throat as the warrior fought with a skill and strength that seemed almost otherworldly. He moved with the rhythm of the land, powerful, precise, unyielding. The leader, watching his men falter, spurred his horse forward and aimed a thrown spear. The warrior barely had time to react, twisting aside as the weapon grazed his shoulder. A sharp pain flared, but he didn't falter. Clara felt something rise inside her, a fierce courage she hadn't known she had. She stood, the blanket falling from her shoulders. "No!" she cried. "This isn't your fight alone." The warrior glanced at her, eyes fierce but approving. "Then stand with me." The leader charged again, this time meeting Clara's steady gaze. He faltered, surprised by her sudden strength. She stepped forward, voice clear and unwavering. "I carry the mark, yes, but I am more than a birthright or a prize." Her words hung in the air, powerful as the wind. The leader's jaw clenched. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, he signaled retreat. "We will come for you again," he warned, voice low and dangerous. "But remember, the bloodline does not belong to a stranger." They turned their horses and vanished into the darkness, leaving Clara and the warrior alone beneath the stars. The warrior sheathed his knife and came to her side. His voice was softer now, almost a whisper. "You are not a trade. You are a tin. Promise." Clara looked up at him, the firelight dancing in his eyes. For the first time, she felt not like a prisoner, but like something or someone worth protecting. The night stretched on around them, wide and wild and full of unknowns. But Clara knew one thing without a doubt: she was no longer alone.